It's the collapse nobody saw coming. Baltimore's Key Bridge, a lifeline turned death trap.
100,000 tons all going into this pier all at once.
Almost 47 years to the day after opening, gone in seconds.
The collapse of the Key Bridge is a global crisis.
Now the Port of Baltimore, blocked. An economic engine for the East Coast and the country, closed. Rebuilding, not even yet begun.
It's my intention that the federal government will pay for the entire cost of reconstructing that bridge.
In this episode of Scripps News Reports, Baltimore's bridge. Good evening from Baltimore. I'm Kelly Swoop. Just over 2 weeks after the collapse, we're still in shock. How did the mighty Key Bridge, an iconic part of the landscape of this city that we love, come down? Could more have been done to save the lives of those 6 construction workers who died? And how will it be rebuilt? When will it be rebuilt? I'm in my 21st year here at WMAR2 News in Baltimore, and together we have witnessed some life-changing, city-altering history. In many ways, this catastrophe is unique. It affects the country in ways that we are just beginning to understand. Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott is joining us now. Mayor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
President Biden was here with us last week. He promised to have Baltimore's back. How confident are you that Congress will provide the funding and this just doesn't get wrapped up into politics?
I'm very confident. Listen, I said this last week and I'll say it again. I have had no greater partner in my time in office than President Biden himself. And to have his support through everything that we've done, whether it's gun violence reduction, obviously the COVID pandemic, investing in our infrastructure, and now this unthinkable tragedy, we know that he's going to be there to see it through. I also have the utmost confidence in Congress. We've seen, even today, you saw even Republican Congressman Andy Harris stand with the rest of the delegation to talk about how important this is. We know that even folks like Senator McConnell has said how important it is. Congressman Mfume talked to me about how the speaker sees this as important for the country and not just for Baltimore. We won't let that loud minority of folks outweigh all of the sensible folks who understand how important the Port of Baltimore is to this country, because if they buy cars, they normally come from this port. If they are farm out in the Midwest, that equipment is coming through this port, and we have to get that back up and running for the country and not just Baltimore.
Now, the governor just signed a bill that will provide direct aid to the individuals whose businesses are impacted by this collapse. I know you signed $1 million over to the port workers who live right here in Baltimore. How important is it, this funding, and how will it be used?
Well, listen, it has to go directly to the workers in the businesses. And I was there with the governor and the Senate president and the speaker and delegate commissioner and the lieutenant governor as they signed the Port Act. So grateful for all of their leadership, legislators, and executive branch, and we're going to be there to support at the city level as well. We have programs that work directly with the small businesses. There'll be money. We have a fund, obviously, that is going directly to the workers at the port, the larger businesses. Everybody is going to be able to be supported as we work to get that channel back open. But it's so important for me to say that I've never seen the level of coordination, not even during COVID, when we had great coordination, but the level of coordination that we've had between federal, state, local governments during this crisis has been top notch, and we know that we're going to keep it that way all the way through.
You know, Mayor, it's just been over 2 weeks since the bridge collapsed. Can you take us back to the moment that you found out that something was happening here at the Key Bridge? A moment I'm sure none of us will ever forget.
Yeah, I'll never forget it. I wasn't asleep yet. My sun charm was up until like 1:15, and the fire chief called a little bit after 1:30. And I remember he said, "Sir, the key bridge collapsed." And I said, "Repeat that." And he said, "It's gone, sir. A ship hit it. It's in the water." And then I immediately just went into emergency mode. Unfortunately, I have a lot of experience in working through these kind of emergency situations, and that muscle memory kicked in. And it wasn't until later that day when I was standing right by where this my screen is, the picture on my screen is, and looking out where the bridge used to be, that it really hit me that it was actually gone. It's a day I'll never forget.
You know, the bridge was built in 1977. Do you believe, with the newer bridge, do you believe there should be new safety protocols put in place for these huge cargo ships so they can get under safely and get up the Patapsco River and out to sea safely?
Yeah, I think that what happens after you have a tragedy like this, right? Everyone's going to be thinking about what you can do. We know NTSB is doing the investigation, and obviously the federal government and the Army Corps engineers and everybody who's working in this unified command will be looking at not just this piece of infrastructure, but infrastructure around the country. I think it's too early for us to be talking about that. We have to get to those phases about what can happen, how the bridge is going to get built, and we can have those conversations in due time to make sure that you can protect us as much as possible. But accidents unfortunately happen, and this is a horrific accident that happened here in Baltimore.
And Mayor, we're having this conversation right now, and it's being broadcast in Baltimore, but it's going to be seen and watched our Scripps stations all over the country. What do you want the viewers to know about our city of Baltimore?
The Baltimore is a great American city. We're gritty. We're proud of our city. We are hardworking people. We are much more than what folks think we are. And if you haven't visited Baltimore, you should, because once you crack that Maryland blue crab shell open, you'll get a taste of something that will seep into your soul for the rest of your life.
Mayor Brandon Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I mentioned a couple of moments ago that the impact of this collapse, not just on Baltimore and the surrounding area, but truly the East Coast and the rest of the country. Mallory Sofaste takes us inside the economic impact of what we're living through right now.
A little over a month ago, Governor Wes Moore touted the Port of Baltimore's record-breaking year. 52.3 million tons of foreign cargo worth $80 billion handled in 2023. The nationwide leader in auto imports and exports, with more than 847,000 cars and light trucks that pass through here. But progress at the port came to an immediate halt, as the key bridge, seen in the background here, is now in pieces in the Patapsco River. Peter Kitzmiller, president of the Maryland Automobile Dealers Association, doesn't anticipate supply chain disruptions like we saw during COVID, but auto delivery deadlines could get longer.
So the vehicles are built, it's just it may take a little bit longer for them to get to dealers across the country. And this wouldn't affect Maryland dealers any more than it would a dealer in Ohio, for example. These cars come through and go all over the country. So it is going to have an impact. I think it's going to be a shorter term impact than some of the other things.
Plus purchase power. Many people who might have been in the market for a car will have to hold off, as thousands are out of work while the Port of Baltimore is closed to vessel traffic. Salvage efforts are well underway, with more cranes lifting debris out of the water.
That channel needs to be open within the maximum of 4 weeks to get these ships back in here and get the men and women of the ILA back to work, get the economy for the state rolling.
What happens after 4 weeks?
It's going to be harder to get the cargo back. It's going to be hard. It's going to be more pressure on the members to go find other jobs somewhere else to take care of their family, and you can't blame them.
There are the current financial concerns, paying rent, buying groceries, and there are the long-term concerns. What happens if some of the work is permanently moved out of Baltimore?
And when you go to bed at night, what's keeping you awake?
I have 2,400 people, and they all have families, and they have kids, and the ILA paid for everything, and the Port of Baltimore paid for everything for me when I was a child. I know what kind of struggle it is going to be if the port doesn't bounce back for these families.
Mallory Sofaste reporting. And no matter where you're watching from, this crisis is closer to home than you may think. Listen to this. Before its collapse, the Key Bridge was classified by the NTSB as fracture critical. That meant the bridge could entirely fall if just a single piece of its structure were to fail. More than 17,000 other bridges across America have that same classification. They face the same risk. In a worst-case scenario, there could be no redundancies built in. Ahead, you will hear why the Key Bridge was built the way it was from one of the men who helped build it. And I'm joined here in just moments by our own Elizabeth Worthington. She went up close to the wreckage and spoke with the person leading the dive teams underneath, searching the murky, dark waters for bodies. This is Scripps News Reports, Baltimore's Bridge.
This is video of the Francis Scott Key Bridge just days before it opened to traffic in 1977.
Let's take a test run on this bridge right now.
A reporter from WMAR, the Scripps news station in Baltimore, drives across the gleaming new span. Construction crews are seen finishing up last-minute work. At the time, the reporter was focused on all the traffic the bridge would alleviate from a busy nearby tunnel.
You think it'll relieve maybe some of those typical 3-mile backups every day at rush hour?
Oh, it'll be some relief.
But in Florida, just 3 years later, a catastrophic event would suddenly shift attention to the support structure beneath the Key Bridge and others like it around the U.S. A cargo ship smashed into a piling on the towering Sunshine Skyway Bridge in Tampa, spilling cars into the bay and killing 35 people. As this video we uncovered reveals, the disaster opened eyes in Maryland to the threat of a ship taking out the Francis Scott Key, still just 3 years old. The Baltimore reporter raises the million-dollar question.
Some 4,500 ships travel through the bay each and every year. The question is, could what happened in Florida happen here?
In the same report, a senior pilot who helps guide ships in and out of the Port of Baltimore explains why he thinks a vessel colliding with a pier there would be so unlikely. He says the design gives ships plenty of room to maneuver around the bridge.
In this channel, it's a good 800 feet wide or better, and we're lined up well for the bridge. There's a wide channel, it's fairly deep.
And Scripps News has learned just 3 months after that interview, 2 incidents would boost confidence that the Key Bridge could survive a ship striking it. Coast Guard records we obtained from the National Archives reveal an accident remarkably similar to what would happen 44 years later. In August 1980, a Japanese container ship called Blue Nagoya lost electricity and was dead in the water. The barge drifted into a concrete shield around a support piling of the Key Bridge. A federal report describing the event called this a crushable protective structure surrounding the pier that proved effective in absorbing a direct collision. And that wasn't the only mishap that evening. Hours earlier, another ship struck a pier on the nearby Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Once again, our Scripps News Baltimore station responded to the scene.
We're going to go down now and get out on a boat and take a look and see if we can see exactly how much damage was done.
What the reporter saw was that a tugboat pulling a barge had run into a concrete barrier protecting one of the supports on the Bay Bridge.
The damage was evident. The concrete had crumbled on impact, but a look at the barge showed a very large dent, and some of the crumbled concrete was still on the deck. Nobody was hurt.
But the 2 vessels in both incidents were nowhere near as large as the mammoth cargo ships of today. Footage we uncovered from the early days of the Francis Scott Key show much smaller, lighter ships going in and out of the port.
It's difficult to overstate the impact of this collision we're talking about. It's not just as big as a building, it's really as big as a block. 100,000 tons all going into this pier all at once.
In the aftermath of the collapse of the Key Bridge, the Maryland Transportation Authority has not yet responded to our questions about what protective structures, if any, were in place around the pilings when the Dali hit, and why, as ships got bigger, the protection systems around this bridge didn't grow with them. Patrick Terpstra, Scripps News, Washington.
Back here in Baltimore, I want to repeat a statistic that I gave you before the break. More than 17,000 other bridges across the country are considered just as vulnerable as the Key Bridge. If one vital part of the structure fails, it could all come down. At the time bridges like these were built, nobody could dream of the size of the ships that we have today. Ashley McDowell found that out firsthand when she spoke with the man who helped build the Key Bridge nearly 50 years ago.
The Outer Harbor Crossing is the last link in the Baltimore Beltway.
I never imagined in my wildest dreams that that bridge would ever come down, because I know how strong it was built.
It's been a week of reflection for Terry Turban. He was part of the construction of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Turban was just 23 years old. On the back end of the Great Recession.
And so I took the job because it was $8.10 an hour, which in 1975, that was good.
He worked on the base of the bridge.
And I worked on the one dolphin that was out on the Dundalk side. And there are those concrete round things you see, there's 4 of them. they really kind of line up the channel so that a ship can get in there and stay where they need to stay.
Working on the barge was a dangerous job.
You got to imagine working on a platform that is rocking and rolling with the currents. And in the early part of '75, it was wintertime, so it was bitter cold. It was slippery. There was a lot of things you had to watch out for.
The bridge was completed in 1977. It wasn't designed to take a direct hit from a ship. Turban says they followed the engineers' designs, and looking at the collapse, you can see that.
The pier that we worked on is still standing. But if you notice, all that steel that was above that pier came down around it, but it's still standing. You see, our job to provide the foundation, we were thorough in that.
Back then, it was just a job. As a result of the tragedy, he has a new perspective.
For me, it was a reflection to see that what we do with our life does indeed count, even when we think it's insignificant.
A piece of him was in the old bridge. Now, he'd like to be part of the rebuild.
Because I had a part in the first bridge, I would like for the company that does the reconstruction to hire me for one day. And then give me an easy job. Maybe not on a barge. Yeah.
Ashley McDowell reporting. You know, seeing the wreckage from this vantage point is breathtaking in its own right. Seeing it up close enough that you can reach out and touch it, is another. Elizabeth Worthington joining us now. Elizabeth, you've been out with the Coast Guard. You've talked to the folks supervising the divers. What's it like out there?
It is like a scene from an apocalypse movie. That is not hyperbole to say. I mean, first you have the actual wreckage. There's literal pieces of roadway and tangled metal jutting out of the Patapsco River. And then you have the ship itself, which is just massive. If you stood it up long ways, it would be almost as tall as the Eiffel Tower. And then you have the cleanup, all the massive cranes and barges, and you can see people actually using those cutting torches to cut into the metal. That is work that we can actually see, and we have been seeing up close. But there's also tons of work going on beneath the surface. We got to look at that as well. We can all see the mess of tangled metal jutting out of the Patapsco River, but below the surface, it's even worse.
The initial mapping is done, and that allowed us to really understand how bad it was down there.
Navy Captain Sal Suarez is leading the underwater effort here. He's in charge of a team of 20 divers, all working through emergency contracts. Since they can't see much in the murky waters, they rely on directions from above the surface.
So how much do you have exposed from the mud line to the top of the gusset plate?
I'd say anytime a diver gets in the water, there's got to be complete trust in the dive supervisor, the person tending their umbilical, to know that they have a standby diver should you get fouled and need to be rescued.
While they're working in the depths of the river, there's one thing always in the back of their minds. There are still the bodies of men down here.
Fortunately, you just come upon it, and then if you have you suspect that you found human remains, then they pull out, and then we call the state troopers. They're on standby to respond, and then they come out and do their thing.
A harrowing task ahead for those divers, and of course those families will never be the same.
Elizabeth, thanks for that report. Ahead, we're going to talk about honoring the victims and hear from the driver, believed to be the last person to make it over the bridge before it collapsed. In the seconds before the Key Bridge collapsed, a quick-thinking captain of the ship that crashed into it made a split decision. His massive ship lost power. He was worried that he may crash into the bridge. A Maryland-based pilot with more than a decade of experience, he pulled out his cell phone, called dispatch, and asked for traffic above him to be stopped. It was just 90 seconds. It was done. The construction workers above, filling potholes, couldn't be saved in time. But lives were undoubtedly saved as drivers were prevented from going over the bridge. We spoke to one man believed to be the last one to make it over the bridge.
If I had stopped and talked for 1 minute, I might not be here talking to you now. I mean, and it's, when it sinks in, it's, it's scary.
Let's close our final moments here together by reflecting on the 6 men who were not so lucky. They lost their lives working in the middle of the night, filling potholes. Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes was the crew's foreman, 35 years old, a father of 4, devoted to his family, his church, and his work. Minor Yasir Suezo Sandoval, 38. Like all of the men, he moved to the U.S. for a better life. Married, 2 kids, his son 18, his daughter just 5. Miguel Luna, 49. He lived in Maryland for nearly 2 decades. His wife owns a food truck here. It's pink and white, a familiar sight in the community. He was a father of 3 and a grandfather. Dorlean Castillo Cabrera, just 26 years old. He loved his job and the financial support he was able to provide to his mother. Carlos Hernandez was 24. Minutes before the collapse, he had just sent a message to his girlfriend back in Mexico saying they were waiting for the cement to dry. Jose Minor Lopez lived here for 20 years with his wife, son, and stepdaughter. His wife says he was always thinking about his family, saying, quote, "Only God knows how hard my heart aches." Now the men are being honored in a nearby park. 6 crosses with the names of each man, their native country's flag topped with a hard hat. And so with the memory of these men fresh in our minds, our thoughts turn to what comes next. The attempt to heal, the effort to rebuild, the long road to recovery. We will be there every step of the way, working for this community and to honor the legacy of these 6 men. For now in Baltimore, I'm Kelly Swoop for Scripps News Reports.